Hello wise people, you are listening to the Wise Words Book Club, where we review some of our favourite non-fiction books and we provide you with their key ideas. Not only that, but we teach you how to apply them to the real world and how to benefit from them. If you like what you hear, make sure you click that sexy little follow button and head on over to our website wisewords.blog or our Instagram wisewordsblog, where we upload daily content on all your favourite books. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, How to Have Impossible Conversations. What a book. And I think it's more poignant than ever, to be honest. With everything going on around the world and no one wants to talk to anyone with a different opinion, this book they need to read. In fact, everyone kind of needs to read it because we all have those kind of topics that are kind of off.
I'll say taboo. Like taboo is probably
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Like, especially like you look at the world now with gender politics and there's just actually like so many aspects. There's race, there's gender politics, there's
political views. Like I mean,
political.
Everything that you can find a way to have an argument is we somehow managing to find it.
But that's where you kind of get this kind of like freedom of speech coming through, because it's like you should feel free to express your opinion and someone hear it and without judging it, you know. It's like there should be no judgment really, because there's no certainty in whatever we say really. It's like you hear someone and it's not their fault if they don't know something, or if they're like, you know, have never come across this and the only thing they've come across is some point that is contrary to ours, you know. But don't judge them for it. And this book basically by Peter Boghossian.
I was about to say this book is all about how to have impossible conversations. Is it the title? I was going to say, like, let's try and define from my memory of what they defined an impossible conversation as. And I want to say it was something along the lines of when the other person will not listen to your, or basically they're going to shut you down without hearing you out. An impossible conversation is when you're probably both talking about completely different topics under the same terminology. So what I mean by that is somebody can say something about the government and they mean a specific aspect of what the government does, and you could be talking about another aspect, but you're basically conflating the two, and you're basically arguing. You're arguing because you can't agree on the definition of what you're arguing about. So this whole book is about like probing people who seem to be very extreme in their views, or not going to budge, or they can't believe you see the world the way that you see it, or that perhaps even you're the person who can't believe that anybody sees the world the other way. This is a book about exploring doubt. It's about exploring other people's opinions and bringing back in my head the art of listening, because I don't see many people actually listening to others. I mean, we could even frame it as like what we do as well sometimes when we're having a conversation, mate. It's like we're so excited to say our bit next, or we're so point to make. So we're not listening. We're too busy like going, okay. Now I'm going to jump in with my point. We're not actually listening to what that person's saying and like why they're saying it.
Yeah.
This book for me is probably, I've read a few books on communication now, and it's definitely probably the best. Probably the best way. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's another really good one, Never Split the Difference, but that's more negotiation anyway. But this is probably the most all-round best book on how to deal with tough topics with people. And I've read other books called like Difficult Conversations, which tend to be about more around relationships. But even this book itself is fantastic for relationships, I would say.
Well, it's incredibly practical, which once again is in the title, a very practical guide. But like, it's very practical, and the way it's laid out is very simplistic. You basically just got a bunch of points for each chapter, and it kind of goes from like beginner to advanced, and like splits it up into different chapters. Like, okay, well, once you've mastered the kind of fundamentals, then you can move on to the wider points, things that just like kind of are like the polishing aspect. But I think to be honest, I don't even see this book as like how to have impossible conversations, just basically how to have conversations. You know, it's like, it's so many people don't know how to. And like you were just saying, you know, we are prime examples of when we have a point, we just want to say that and we're not listening. Like right there, that's like a conversation should be both people listening, because if you're not listening, then you can't internalize what they're saying to then make it like mix with your thoughts, and then you say what you think. It's like there's such important aspects of how to talk to someone, because what's the point of talking to someone if you're just trying to say what you want to say?
I think one of the he brings up later in the book, but I'm going to touch on it now. A really important point, or really interesting way of showing that you're listening, is by being able to repeat back to the person who's just told you a point exactly what they meant by the point. So, like, repeating it back, not word for word, but like basically summarizing what they're saying. So, in the book, Never Split the Difference, he does it. He talks about it as well. One of the best ways to get somebody to understand that you've been listening to them is to basically repeat back what they're saying, what they've just said to you, but in a way that they haven't, like in a way that you've got the core point of what they're trying to say. If you're going to get me, so you kind of summarize what they were saying to you. Like, oh, is this what you're trying to say to me? And then that shows you're really listening.
Yeah,
I was just about to say, it's so interesting how little that ever happens to me, or even I do it to other people. Do you mean I don't do it to other people? But it's so interesting how little people can actually recite back to you what you meant, and that just shows that we're all in sort of grounded conversation where we're all just too busy thinking about ourselves, what we're going to say next. Like, oh, he said a story about this. Oh, I got a story like that as well. Let's just jump in and it's almost like back to that elephant in the brain. Like conversations, like a way of showing off to each other. So you're both like, I'm not saying that it's definite conscious, like, oh, we're all just trying to outcompete each other, but it's definite level of like, I want to put my 2 pence in. I want to put my 2 pence in, instead of saying, hang on a second, let's go back and let's just listen to this person speak and hear them out first before I add something. So that reminds me, let's just get straight into the sort of the fundamentals, because basically what the fundamentals are is the sort of understanding the why of the conversation and getting deep below the sort of mindset that you should be in. So one of the first things they say is you need to switch your mindset from winning, like an argument. So let's go back to the context of an argument now. You got to switch it from winning to understanding. Understanding being understanding why the person opposite you believes the things they do and why it matters to them, etc. It's all good trying to win an argument, but you read How to Win Friends and Influence People. You like the honest, deep truth is you never win an argument. They might just say, "Oh yeah, you're right," to shut you up. That is probably the most realistic chance, or like that's probably the nicest thing they'll do to you is just say yes and agree with you. But that's only to shut you up. You don't win by arguing and trying to what's the word? Dominate somebody else, because that's the way I see it. If you're trying to win an argument, you're almost trying to dominate.
But that's exactly it. And if someone knows that you're trying to be the winner in a conversation, why would they back down and suddenly be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, you're right"? It's like it shouldn't be about winning or losing. It's just neutral. It should be about understanding the other person's point, so that you both can find or understand the truth of the matter. And that he brings this up in terms of like, what's your goal about it? And a lot of like the things that he brings up are like, if you just go in with like a learning mindset, that you're just curious. It doesn't matter what they say. It could be wrong, it could be right, but really, what is wrong, right? Different topic. But it's just like, having a goal, but like having a learning attitude, a curious attitude when you go into something, rather than like, oh, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change their mind. Because for all you could have the wrong mindset. You could be wrong.
100%. I was going to say, actually, just so we can, I feel like this book, okay, right, just from looking at this, and this is also me just doing what I've just said, I had a point and I've just completely butted into you here, but I think it's better if we go through it as we go through an argument.
Absolutely.
This is almost, you're building up from an argument, right? So like the argument's just started to happen, you're infuriated because they're not listening to you. So what do you do first, okay? The first thing you should do is think about the goals, like you just said, the goals of the conversation. Do you want to beat them down and make them submit, or do you want to actually understand them? Could you be the one who's in the wrong here, or could you be the one who's misunderstanding? So I think also another rule here is you should always take agency for at least yourself and try and understand them first, even if they're not understanding you. Then the next point is, so you've shifted this mindset from winning to now you're just trying to understand, you're a bit curious. So now you need to switch to this idea of them as a conversation partner rather than an adversary.
You've said this a bunch of times in terms of like metaphors with reframing something from an argument to like a dance. Because then you end up seeing it as like a cooperative like aspect rather than a duel or a fight. And it's exactly like a conversation.
Maybe it's a study partner. So it could be like a dance, or you could see this person as a study partner. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or you could.
Well, there's probably loads of different relationships in which they're more like
It's only because is basically one of the things he's saying is you need to shift from an opponent to like this person is a partner, and I can learn from him, including learning mainly learning why they believe what they believe. Like that, I think that's the core. You need to understand why they believe what they believe.
Because if you go in with the mindset that they are the enemy, then that's going to change your whole approach. You know?
No, true. And I like this as well because he talks about saying like, you know how sometimes you sort of somebody says something like maybe a conspiracy theorist or somebody who just has this really far-fetched opinion, and you just think, how could somebody fucking believe that? And he talks about this idea of switching that to like, how could somebody believe that? Like a small change of like curiosity rather than incredulity. That's what he says. Like, so instead of change it to like an aggressive, like, why the fuck would somebody believe that? To like, oh, actually, hang on a second, that's a bit weird. How can somebody actually believe that? That's interesting. I quite like that because it's a subtle shift. It's like literally the same phrase. It's just the motive behind it is from basically the motive changes from ego domination to be like, oh, I'm better than you. Like, how could you believe that? To actually, hang on a second, this is weird. Somebody believes something completely different to me, yet we're on the same planet. How
exactly? It's so jarring.
But
it makes a lot of sense in terms of like, you know, I don't particularly like the statement or like phrase like conspiracy theorist, because it is basically just a different opinion that is the complete opposite of the spectrum of the mainstream, you know. But look at how many times that someone has proposed something, like look at like we thought that Earth was flat, you know, and then someone was like, oh no, it's round.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Yeah. The conspiracy theorists think it's round.
It's like, could you imagine being like, wait, you're fucking stupid. Oh, it doesn't make
conspiracy theorist in my head, right? Is weaponized language. It's weaponized language to marginalize anybody who has an alternative opinion. It's a way to basically say you're cuckoo because you're a conspiracy theorist. It's like a way of putting traits onto somebody who shares a different opinion. Shares a different opinion. I basically mixed up then because I was thinking the better word for me would be contrarian, like a contrarian opinion. And then conspiracy.
No, that is
It means there's agency behind it. I was about to say conspiracy means there's like some sort of plot behind it, whereas contrarian opinion, there's just different connotations of the word, right? And that's what I mean by the weaponized language. Like the moment you label somebody's conspiracy, you label them as cuckoo. You label them as a contrarian, they become like an entrepreneur or like an innovator. You know that? You kind of get what I mean? It's like two different perceptions.
It's interesting. The other day there was a protest in central London, and it was all about, you know, they don't want like a second lockdown, and talking about like COVID and a lot of like cover-ups from the BBC, all these kinds of things. And there were like 20,000 people. Okay, like that's a fucking big march. And then the newspaper basically were just like 20,000 conspiracy theorists. It's like, well, wait a minute. There's 20,000 people that all have the same opinion. Why is that? Like, if it's just like something that is against the mainstream or whatever, but it seems ridiculous to go into something without you knowing what their actual point is, not actually listening, and just being going like, well, you've got a reason for saying this. You've got an agenda.
Once again, it's weaponized language. It's basically trying to blow off the whole movement in one word by adding conspiracy theorist. It's basically saying, look at these bunch of cuckoo people turning up and actually caring about the fact that their business is getting shut down because the government have decided to intervene. But I don't actually have sides, to be honest, but it's just like, it's really interesting how you never hear the other side. You just basically just get labeled, and then you get marginalized by the label, and then it's not really reported properly, is it? Nobody's ever said, why are these people protesting? Let's go interview a few of them and hear their sort of hopes, dreams, aspirations.
Because I think it's this like kind of fear or scared aspect that they could be right, or as in like they could be wrong, as in like, you know, I don't want to hear their side of the story because I don't want to be proven wrong. You know, it's such a firm belief that like, it's like, oh well, you know, it makes me look stupid, it makes me look weak, those kinds of aspects.
Another thing is, if you really think about it, mate, most people have already sort of already stuck to the lockdowns, right? It basically would be saying to them, after all the effort you put into defending the country by staying put, you now actually did it for no reason. And that's not true, but that is the rationalization. That's why they can't do it. It's like you doing something for like 5 years to find out it was never like, it's like basically, right, okay, praying for like half a year because you got into religion and then finding out it doesn't exist. It's pretty jarring. Because
I guess it's like expertise bias or whatever it's called. You know, it's like if you indulge in something so much, if you're a scientist that's been working on something for 20 years and then you find out that there's some evidence that proves it wrong, it's going to make you look like a tit if you suddenly be like, oh, well, I was wrong the whole time.
Yeah, that's why you've got conflicts of interest. That's almost why all science is progressed by the new like what's the word, the new guard, like the younger sort of generation to a degree.
Yeah.
The older generation get all entrenched in their ideas, and then it takes somebody who's going to completely revolutionize it to come in and be like, hang on a second, you guys are all seeing it the wrong way. And obviously, like the more they cite each other's work, the better they look. If you get me, that's just the way academia kind of works. So the more citations you get, the more verification that your ideas are great, the better you look. So that's almost like they're looking for that sort of validation. But yeah, kind of on a tangent.
But yes, that's why you should reframe your partner, your conversation partner, as a partner rather than an enemy. It then goes into rapport. You want to talk a bit about that?
Thomas, mate, I'm going off my notes here, so I didn't get straight into rapport here. If you wanna do it, because I got here basically saying something like the next step is obviously you've now got them as a partner in your head, right? So you're going to treat them a bit differently. So the next one is like making your goals of collaboration and understanding explicit. So for example, let's just say they said something, you'd be like, oh wow, that's a really interesting idea. Like how did you come to see it that way? You know, it was that idea of like, or I really want to understand how you came to that conclusion. Can you tell me? Or that sort of thing where you're explicitly saying, I'm here to understand what you're saying. Because I'm sure most people who have really sort of maybe out their opinions probably get the look of disgust or like, how the fuck do you believe that? Whereas you're somebody who's now going, I really want to understand how you came to that conclusion. And quite a lot of people who think they've come to like this or have a weird sort of belief, they're almost proud to how they come to that conclusion. You know, they kind of, they've seen information that other people haven't seen, so they think they're in this like secretive group of people who've figured it out. So they love to sort of share it. But that's what I got next, mate. And what about rapport then? Did you have like
absolutely? Well, rapport basically just the idea that you kind of are trying to build a good connection with someone. It's like you're not going to suddenly just strike up a conversation about gender politics, and if you're on both different sides, you're right or left wing. It doesn't happen that quickly, and someone's not going to be as accepting to you if you just jump straight into it. You have to kind of like warm it up. The way that like someone feels comfortable to talk about these things is if they're in a comfortable environment, and that's basically what rapport does. It's like, I'm building this environment, I'm making you feel more comfortable, and like it gets into this later on, but basically like I am giving myself to the conversation, and you should feel comfortable to do that too. And so like the building rapport is like really important, because you're basically just like almost like buttering them up a bit, to be like, okay, now like you can see that I'm here, I want to listen to you. And now you can like dive into the conversation that you want to talk about.
I mean, quite a lot of rapport I was going to say is based off showing your likeness and so quite interestingly, one of the whole idea of reframing them as a conversational partner actually would help you build rapport, because you're going to find yourself treating them differently than if you think they were in opposition. But anyway, a lot of rapport is based off sort of showing them it's a safe environment, like you just said, showing that you're here to listen. They talk about quite a lot of the sort of yes, no, a bit like we just did then. Yeah, I know you're not doing it purposely, but it's like that idea that you are acknowledging that you've heard them, like you're nodding your head. They sound like that's the signals that people need to see to hear or to perceive that you're listening.
I can't do it. I do it so much, actually, almost too much. Sometimes I actually cut it out of the podcast, because I'm just like, yeah.
No, but no, I'm exactly the same. But I don't know. I wouldn't see it as a curse, unless of course you've got somebody who's attuned to it and they almost think you're manipulating them. But in reality, some people are just like that. But so the fact this actually brings up another point. There's one of these a bit later about this idea of rethinking the opposite, or I was about to say opposition, your conversational partner's intent. So that's it. So instead of assuming their intent is bad, so like they have like this belief that you could say is like, oh, this person doesn't believe coronavirus is real. Wow, they're really bad. They want to spread the disease. Instead of that, you've got to frame it as curiosity, to be like, hang on a second, like people aren't don't actually desire bad things really. Like even the worst criminals genuinely believe that they're good, and they have this thing that they believe they're doing the world a favor or something. Even suicide bombers think they're doing the world a favor, they're not inherently, well, in fact, it depends on what your morals are, but they aren't inherently bad. They just they think they're doing the right thing, right? So it's a bit like what I just said then. So let's just say you doing this yes thing to me, right? And I'm somebody who's like tried to read into Rapport and thinks now that you're trying to manipulate me. I put bad intentions onto the fact that that could be your normal way of behaving. And this is what people do to each other all the time. They see something which they don't necessarily agree with or they know about, and they just assume the worst. Like, this person here is trying to manipulate me. This person. And the moment you start assuming the worst intentions, you're going to put your guard up. You're not going to want to share. You're not going to want to listen. You're going to get defensive.
Yeah.
And that's the thing.
But we make so many assumptions, and like whether they're good or bad, it's like you can't know until you actually talk to someone. We've talked about assumptions before in terms of like, don't assume someone's going to be no or going to shut you down because you don't know, and not unless you try.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be willing to actually try to see, because it's so much bullshit to like have certainty about something that is just so
it's for something
ambiguous.
you have fuck all information about apart from your assumptions,
exactly.
and then your inferences from the assumptions you made. Like I think what's quite interesting here is the idea that what they talk about is, so like, obviously don't try and avoid these intentions. Just try and think about it. Like, you just realize that you're making an assumption and that their intentions aren't obvious to you. And then you talked about this reverse point that if they assume you have bad intentions, so let's say they call you out just saying, "Oh, you're just trying to manipulate me now," then you've got to switch your conversation from them about your intentions to then trying to understand the reasoning. So I guess the way you could do it that way is be like, "Oh, what makes you think that?" Or like, what makes trying to get them to reveal why they think your intentions are bad, because then they will start realizing, hang on a second, I've only seen them do this one thing, and now I'm assuming they're doing something bad. But it's just amazing how, like, from what I've read as well around conversations and communication, this is like a thing that comes up a lot. And it's always like, we always assume worse intentions from other people than ourselves. We always give ourselves some slack. And we always give other people like the worst intentions. Like, they're here to manipulate me. They're like, my boss is here to make money off me and doesn't care about me. We always make these horrible assumptions that just sort of hold us back. Especially in conversation.
Well, think about how many times, like, someone, if you're at a club and a guy can't go and speak to a girl because he just assumes she's going to say no and shut him down. But you would never know that unless you tried.
On the flip side, think about how many girls read into the intentions of a boy who immediately comes up to him in a club and just say, "Oh, he's trying to sleep with me." People are very quick to jump to the intentions of somebody else. And what even gives them that right to have that assumption when if it's like they don't get hit on that often or something? How can I guess it's media. You just see it in films and you think, "Oh, right, this boy's hitting on the girl. That means they're interested." I think maybe the principle underlying all this, to be honest, especially with this intention stuff, is just showing a bit of humility, or the mindset of humility in a conversation. Like, you do not know what this person thinks. And that is the whole point of Impossible Conversations. Your mission is to be a detective. You need to find out why this person thinks the things they do. You don't need to think about bad intentions that they have. You need to be like, right, fuck the intentions. They obviously have like this thought process behind what they're saying. Let's hear out this thought process and try and figure it out.
Accept the ambiguity in it.
Accept the ambiguity, of course.
He then goes on to what's it called? Shoot the messenger. Yeah. He talks about like when you come into a conversation, don't deliver it. You're not doing a lecture, okay? You're not coming in just stating how something is, because it makes you seem like you know it, and you don't. You don't have certainty in a lot of what we talk about. So you have to go in with like an open mindset, and instead of delivering a message and being like, "Oh, well, this is what it is," because if you go in like that, they're going to put their guard up. They're not really going to be interested, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, this person is just so stubborn. Like, there's no point. Why should I try and talk to this person if they just believe beyond everything that what he's talking about is right?"
What do you call it? Sorry, you called it delivering a message, right?
Yeah.
It's essentially a judgment, isn't it? You make a judgment. You say something as if you've passed judgment on something, right? Is that?
Yeah.
So like, okay, so you sent a message. You'd be like, "This is how it should be." Okay, is that like? I'm just trying to think of an exact phrase that somebody would use, which is like, is in passing a message. If you get what I mean. So instead of you're just telling somebody how it is, it's almost like
it'd be like, "Oh, well, I guess it would be like, oh, all Tories are Nazis,"
Okay, I get you.
It's like it's a very like you're delivering it as if it's a truth when we all know that not every Tory is a Nazi, but when you deliver it like that, it just shows where you stand on something and that you're not willing to budge.
Interesting. Yeah? So you're saying it shuts down conversations? Is that what it does?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't give room for someone to be like, oh, are you sure about that? Like, are you sure that every Nazi is every Tory is a Nazi? Because that's not the case. But it's like someone doesn't really want to get into a conversation if they have to be like that.
I've actually I've just found my notes on this as well. Okay, so this is interesting. Yeah, I get what you mean. So it talks about distinguishing between delivering a message and authentic. So he talks about delivering a message feels like teaching. So whereas a conversation has a give and take, so it would be less likely for more folks to out something. Okay, so this is interesting. So he talks about this idea of delivering messages. You would deliver more messages if you don't presume to understand the reasoning. So I think what he means is, like, let's just say you had like this weird belief, and then I deliver a message saying like, oh, you believe this because I start lecturing on you on the fact you believe that, right? So you just say, I'm against lockdowns because I think it's all a conspiracy, and then I come in with a lecture of like, oh, this many people are dying a week. This is how many cases are rising, right? I think this is what he means by the delivering the message, right? I'm now delivering a message to you that you're wrong. Like, you basically said something to me, and then I'm trying to lecture you on why you're wrong. And this is like one of the things that we all do, which is bad. It's like we always try and impose our opinion back at somebody and try and disprove them before we even heard them out. They've just said a statement. You've gone in with I'm going to lecture you because you're wrong, and they've then gone, fuck you. Like, don't tell me that. Like, I've obviously made my own opinion up on this. So don't fucking. I already seen this data, so don't just come and throw that in my face. And it talks about this, like, when you enter messenger mode, it shows you're not listening, whereas the learning mode, the curiosity mode, is more centered on questions. So the moment you start to feel like you're not asking questions, you're probably in the delivering message mode, which is not good. I think is this idea, like, nobody likes to be lectured.
Because you're capping it. You're putting a full stop on it as if there's nothing else to be talked about. You know, whereas the questioning kind of leaves it open and leaves someone to be able to like actually explain something.
I guess you're not even just capping it though, are you? Really, you're kind of,
and you can't meet a message with a message.
Yeah. No, fuck me. I think the truth here is when you meet a message with a message, that's an argument, because you are meeting.
Exactly.
You're just consistently not looking at but you're missing the underlying reasoning behind it. You're just both butting horns. So it's really interesting. What was it called? It was what was it? In an argument, you're trading conclusions. That was it. It was in a different book. Difficult Conversations. That's it. He says arguments are based on trading conclusions rather than trading stories.
That's good.
Which I like that. Yeah, you like that? I liked it a lot. I thought it makes a lot of sense, and it's similar to this. When you're trading your conclusions and like your end your end judgment on something, you are more likely to find friction because you don't have that leeway of understanding how that conclusion was reached. And it's the same with this. The moment you shut them down and you start delivering messages, i.e. conclusions, you don't understand the underlying stories behind their conclusions, so you can't actually build anything off that conversation because you're too busy just going, no, I'm right, you're right, no, I'm right. That's a really interesting point. That is a really interesting point, and it ties into that as well, which is interesting. I didn't think about that. I've got a few things more here from like the fundamentals, because obviously the book was fundamentals, and it goes to beginners. So before we quickly move on to that, I got a few ones to mention. You might have had these ones as well. So I like this one a lot, and this one's always take responsibility for miscommunication. So instead of saying, "Oh, you're not explaining it correctly," or like, what's another one? Like, "Oh, that's stupid." No, that's stupid. You know what I mean? You basically place the blame like, "Oh, I can't understand you," or something like, "It's your fault," basically, for your communication issues. When you start pinning the blame on the fact it's them, why you can't understand, they're going to feel a bit like, basically insulted, right? So his point is that you should always say like, "I'm not sure I really understand what you're saying. Can you explain that to me? I'm sorry, I'm being stupid." That sort of thing.
Yeah.
You put the stupidity onto yourself. Like, I think, "Oh, I'm being stupid here, but I can't quite understand you. Like, what are you saying?" And that way, they are more likely to continue their train of thought than, "Oh, you're not explaining it very well." To me, that's quite an obvious one, but it's also really
powerful. I think you're essentially basically getting rid of the ego from the conversation. When you go in, get rid of your ego, and that's what creates the kind of curiosity vibe. And so instead of like, it doesn't matter whose miscommunication it is, if you're trying to get somewhere and you've got a hurdle, just accept it. You don't know whether they're going to accept it or just, So just be like, oh yeah, no, sorry, I don't understand. Please just, can you explain this to me? There's no point in like blaming someone for it.
Of course, but it's one of those subtle ones that you kind of like. Let's just say you can't understand them, and you're getting frustrated. It's very easy to lash out and blame them. That's kind of the point behind it, and it's they almost basically another thing it does, right? Is it models humility. It models this, like we'll talk about this later about modeling in terms of like you behave a way that you want them to behave towards you. So by admitting that you have like that you're being stupid and that you can't quite understand it, they are more likely to behave like that later because they've seen that as acceptable in this social environment to like degrade yourself a little bit and not feel hurt by degrading yourself because it's a safe environment to degrade yourself. If you can show
you're showing that you can be vulnerable.
Yeah, if you can happily show to somebody that you're willing to like take the piss out of yourself, not take yourself too seriously, they're going to chill out with you. That's why humor is so effective. That's another topic anyway. Well, what's this other one? I got another few here. So another one is do not parallel talk. You remember that one? So that's like basically what we talked about earlier. So it's like somebody tells a story, okay, about their time they went to Cornwall, and then the next thing I say is my time in Cornwall, and it becomes progressive. It becomes like a progressive, more like competition of who's got the best story.
Yeah.
Oh, I just really like. I don't know. Yeah, that's basically
my manager is exactly like that. Like you'll tell a story, and then he'll come in to try and tell a better story, and it's just the most infuriating thing.
I hope he's not listening to the podcast.
Mate, I don't care if he is. Yeah. He's one fan I don't want.
Fair enough. No, I know. Mate, we all know those types of people, mate. We all know those types of people. And then there's two more points I got here before I can move on. So I got the avoiding call-outs. So never ever, as a good rule, call somebody out for their opinion. So never sort of, especially the right and wrong, like saying that's the right thing to believe.
What do you mean by calling out?
Calling out, so like somebody says a belief and like that's just a nasty thing to believe, or like calling somebody out for their belief by judging it. Basically, it's like a judgment, but it can be even an indirect judgment, one that's sort of like almost like a side remark. Anything that basically back to the modeling thing as well. Anything where you pass judgment means it's okay now in the social environment for judgments to be passed, or they feel like they're being judged, they're going to be on the defensive. So you should never like. Let's just say they say something that's a bit offensive. You should never go like, oh, well, actually, wait. Do you know what? I'm kind of eating my words as I say this. His point was, even if you're offended, it's like hold it in. But I guess there is an argument to be had if they're like trying to dominate you, or somebody was trying to be overly offensive to you. Do you take it? I don't know.
No, I don't think you should.
Like circular reasoning here, right? Cool.
Wait, so he said that.
That's it. Should... So he's saying like, rather than calling out somebody's offensive, being like that's really offensive, try to make sense of what they're saying and appreciate their authenticity. Even if it's rough. So maybe it's something they say something really offensive, like potentially even racist, right? Obviously, there's this massive bandwagon now towards like, if you don't call it out, you're basically a racist, which is just stupid dichotomy, logic, stupid. Anyway, basically trying to understand them, but then people have a low tolerance for understanding. So like, especially if they're deemed as racist, that's interesting. So don't call it.
I guess it's.
Try and make sense it's like. I appreciate them for being authentic. That's the point. You were saying, like, even if it's rough, appreciate them for telling what they think, and don't. So basically, what it is if they say something really sort of like maybe socially unacceptable, you don't really call it out for that exact moment. You kind of go, "Hang on a second, that's a bit weird that they believe that." Then you try and sort of go into that reasoning rather than just being straight into the "wow, you're a bad person" type of thing.
I think that's the approach, because realistically, people double down when you end up like, oh, you're wrong.
Yeah,
oh, that's a bad view to have. And if someone generally does have a bad view like that, like they make some racist comment or something like that, you just suddenly blurting it at them and being like, well, you're wrong, is not going to suddenly make them change their mind. It's really not. In fact, they're probably just going to be like, oh, well, and they justify it. The best way is kind of, I guess, to accept that that's what they've said, and then you kind of question on and be like, oh, well, so why do you think that? Oh, okay. And then you kind of go into it and be like, well, what's your evidence behind that? That kind of approach.
It's kind of like that, yeah. It's like, not if they say something really sort of like bad. Well, it does say here if there's severe infractions, like somebody's really bad, then obviously, then
well, yeah, then.
But like for the majority, where it might be like a small comment here or there, which you're thinking, oh, hang on a second, should you be allowed to say that? Instead of like calling them out, it's more like, right, let's try and figure out why this person believes what they just said.
Yeah.
But that's what I got, mate, for the fundamentals.
I think there was a big point that he was talking about in terms of like, you know, for someone to really change their opinion on something, they have to kind of internalize it. You know, they have to listen, they have to internalize it. They kind of like, you're basically providing them a different mental model. And they now have the theory, but realistically, they have to go out and implement that. You kind of like put it in an experience and see if it works or not. Do you know what I mean? So basically, it's like you can talk to someone about like changing their opinion, but you can't force them to change their opinion right then and there. They have like a threshold. They have a point at which, you know, if you go beyond, then it kind of seems like you're badgering them. You've got to like instill the doubt, give them this information, and then let them go off and kind of change their mind on their own terms. You know, you can't force someone to change their terms. And that's one of the points he was kind of talk about in terms of like know when the conversation is kind of ended. You know, that you can walk away kind of knowing that, okay, well, I've given him all of my points. Hopefully he takes that on board, he internalizes that, and then he goes off. I remember I was watching like a little video about, this is going to annoy me, Daryl Davis, I think it is.
Okay.
He was like, I think it was like a black journalist, and he organized to meet one of these KKK leaders, and he did it without them knowing that he was black. And they like went, they organized, his secretary like organized it, and this guy turned up and he had like a couple of like kind of bodyguards in a way, and they were in some like motel, and he was like surprised at first that, you know, this guy was black and that they were going to have some like conversation. And then there was kind of this like, there was this weird noise halfway through the conversation, and everyone like looked at each other and they were both kind of like scared and was like kind of eyeing each other up, and it turned out like some like ice had melted in the fridge or something, and then they all burst out laughing, like all of them laughed together. And that doesn't mean that they were friends, but then he was like, you know what, then I actually called him up like a couple weeks later, and then I called him up a couple weeks later after that, and every time like then I could go around to his house, he didn't have these bodyguards, and then we were friends, and then eventually he ended up like persuading this guy to leave the KKK. And the whole reason I'm talking about this is the point that, like, you know, things don't happen overnight. People don't change their opinions like that. They have to kind of like internalize it and experience everything else in contrast with that. They have to live through the kind of information that you've given them.
True. I would say as well, people's opinions are built up of multiple bits of evidence, right? So it's not like one-off conversation with you. Don't be so really egotistical to think a one-off conversation with you, the all-knowing person who's just told them all the reasons why they're wrong, is going to convince their mind when they built up steady evidence in their head of why their belief is real, you know?
Precisely.
It's not, yeah. So I think you just stepped on what my next point was going to be for this entire book, and I would say this is probably the key principle behind all of it. For this idea of like having an impossible conversation and changing people's minds, it's this idea that the whole goal here is not actually to change their mind. Like obviously that's kind of like the indirect goal, but the direct goal that you're doing here is instilling doubt.
Yeah.
So this idea of like you basically have to make them question their beliefs. So I think the principle also is behind it. It's like nobody really changes your beliefs. You change them yourself. If you get me. Nobody can force you to change what you believe. You change it by sort of self-awareness, questioning yourself in your own time, and rethinking why you believe what you believe. Right? In my head, that's how I would personally go through my belief system. It would be like, hang on a second, is this correct right now? Like, you know what I mean? You kind of roughly figure out yourself, like, is this person lying to me? And you build up evidence or whatever. But the whole idea of this is like you can't convince them directly, but you can get them to start convincing themselves by making them realize what they know isn't as real or as true as they think. So this whole idea of getting them to doubt themselves.
And that's what the whole book is, basically. They're just like different ways of approaching, you know, this way of like instilling doubt. You know, they're just modeling goals, treating your partner in a certain way. It's all to get to like this kind of optimum point at which you can give them this piece of information that instills this doubt, and then they go off and they have to like process that. You know, I think it was in like, was it Flow? He talks about, you know, you come across a mental model, and then you put that in place, and then that works for you, and then that works for a certain amount of time, and then it becomes a belief. And then if that works for a good amount of time and nothing challenges that, then it becomes a credulous belief and it becomes too solidified. But the way that we should think about things is kind of like having these loose mental models. If we come across something that's better, we can slot that in and get rid of the last one. And this is basically being able to crack away at that solidified belief, provide them with a piece of information, and then let them go off and try these different mental models, because they may just not have come across it yet. That's why it's so interesting in terms of like people being conditioned, having completely different pasts, because maybe they never came across the answer that we have. You know, they've never read this point in a book, and then you give that to them, and that's the first time they have that.
Well, they've never seen this piece of information. They've never, It's usually to do with that, mate. I think I think he talks building upon that sort of idea of like not actually having the information. He brings up this idea of the unread library effect, and this idea that did you get this point?
I can't remember it actually.
So basically, he makes this idea that we think we possess the information in the books because we have access to them, or we think we possess the knowledge because somebody's summarized the finding in a book, and we've never read the book or studied the topic in depth, right? We've never you know what I mean? We've never delved into the library, but we know we have access to a library, or we know we've skimmed the surface almost, right? We've skimmed the surface of this library of books, and he calls this the unread library effect, which is that this idea that most of our knowledge is basically borrowed by people who distill it. So somebody the media will distill an event down to like the key, like the theory of evolution to a degree is distilled to the average person, whereas somebody who actually goes in and studies it realizes it's a bit more nuanced, right? It's that type of thing of surface level knowledge vs deep knowledge. And basically his point is that because we all have access to all this information, we now think that whenever we've skim read something, because we're like this race that basically just thinks, oh wow, I've got the main gist of it, I now know it, we then walk around with confidence that our opinion is like great from reading that surface without actually understanding the details behind it. So he calls this the unread library effect, and basically what the concept actually means is people are very confident, right? It's back to Dunning-Kruger, not knowing much. Like the less you know, the more confident you are. So people are very confident until you probe, and this is the whole reason why the doubt model works, is because most of people's knowledge is borrowed and not really well thought through. So this is why, when you start questioning them, going like, "Hang on a second, like, oh, you said that. Why do you think that?" And then they'll quote something maybe from a newspaper. And then you could ask them a question, something like, "Oh, well, what about this?" So back to like the statistics thing that we talked about recently, like, "Oh yeah, like so there's a 70% chance of you dying," and I'd be like, "Okay, so well, how many people were in that test, or how many?" So if it was like a clinical trial, it'd be like, "How many people was this tested on?" And then they won't know the answer. But like, it's that type of reasoning when you actually get down to the truth, when you boil down to like the details, and then they realize, fuck, like I actually don't know the details. I've just taken, oh, this journalist said it, but then in fact, this is a point later on in the book where he says, you now have to then probe I can't remember what he calls it. He calls it something else. But this idea that they use experts to justify their knowledge, but then you have to probe how they know the expert's worth listening to, etc. But anyway, continue on. It's this unread library effect is so interesting because especially with Google as well, because everything's a Google away, right? You could ask somebody anything. They think if they Google it, they then see it, and they're like, oh wow, I now know the answer. But Google's algorithm even changes depending on the person searching.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like you're only going to end up seeing what you want to see anyway.
No, that is a good point. You do have the illusion like, oh, I've read this book, so I know what evolutionary psychology is about. But it's like, no, mate, you read a book, and it doesn't know everything about it.
Yes, and
exactly.
Ideally, you should be reading the opposite, like the arguments against it as well, like the flaws in the theory. This reminds me as well. So he talks about here, but this is another bit of modeling. So you should admit, right, when somebody says they're like an expert on something, or they start talking about something, you should be like, oh, that's really interesting. I don't really know much about this subject. And and then you start questioning. So like you admit and you model, or you show them that you're open to saying that, oh, I don't know much. And then you basically get them to explain to you in as much detail as possible why they believe what they believe. And that's when you're going to find like the holes. And it's all good when you find these holes. So, because obviously then you can start being like, oh, well, now you don't know because you don't know this. But it's never about that. You've always got to just be inquisitive, curious, and like almost help them through their reasoning. You always got to be there. It's almost like being like a therapist to a degree, sort of helping them through figuring out what they know and what they don't know.
Well, yeah, pretty much. It's like you want them to use up all their excuses so that then they realize, okay, wait a minute, I don't know what this subject is about. And then you kind of dive in and be like, oh, well, there's this point or there's this point, and you're kind of giving them information once you've got past their barrier. And that's what the modeling does, really. It's like modeling like provides this kind of, like we were talking about, this comfortable environment in which someone feels, well, like they can say whatever, and if you do certain behaviors that are like vulnerable, or like, you accept that you don't know something, then it's easy for them to be like, oh, actually, I feel comfortable to say that I don't know this either, and you're creating that environment.
Yeah. No, but it is all about the modeling things. I think is really interesting. I think it makes a lot of sense to like. It's a bit like the depreciative sort of humor, like basically taking the piss out of yourself. People feel comfortable because you're modeling that you don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
Because basically, the way I see it is when you're depreciative of yourself, is like you don't judge yourself too harshly. Therefore, you almost imply that you're not going to judge them too harshly, or the people around you. So you basically say this, you basically implying to them this is a safe environment, is a judgment-free environment by being humorous.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I wonder if this ties into, like, I think we were talking about this on our Rome podcast last time, like mimetic behavior.
Yeah.
It's like you want someone to do something first so that you kind of have an excuse of doing it. So that you kind of either feel comfortable or you have excuse, or
You're looking for cues for how to behave, and one of the best cues is people make you feel comfortable by showing that they don't judge themselves, so they're not going to judge you.
Yeah.
Is the people that, okay, right? I'll give you an example. Somebody who sits there who's really uptight and he doesn't really talk and is shy. They're very hard to get on with, and they put everybody on edge because they don't show emotion. They're not being very clear with their signals that it's a safe environment. If anything, they look unsafe, so you feel unsafe. Whereas somebody who's sort of relatively charismatic, sort of takes the piss out of themselves, talks a lot, ask lots of questions, you feel comfortable around them because they're literally giving you signals that you should be comfortable around me because I'm comfortable around you.
Yeah.
So that's the level of mimetic sort of behavior. It's like it's like feelings are infectious. Like people are infectious. The feelings people give you, like somebody who's charismatic, somebody who's not, just by the feelings they make you feel when you're around them, and that is to do with those sort of cues.
Yeah. So you just need to take the initiative, really.
Kind of, I think so.
And like as soon as you starts like it's like a domino effect.
Basically, you should assume that other people won't take the initiative. So it's similar to this. You should assume that other people won't see you as the conversational partner. So you need to be the one who takes initiative, because at the end of the day, you can only control what you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the modeling thing's really fucking interesting.
It's I think it's so important just for like communicating with anyone, kind of,
And this, I'm gonna go to the next point, mate. I think so. That sort of sums that up. Then I don't really want to go too deep on this because we're already pretty like far into this conversation already, and I don't really want to do this for an hour and a half because I'm gonna try and avoid the moral stuff. Going too deep into the moral stuff, I think we could probably maybe we could touch over this moral stuff when we do like coddling on American minds. Maybe, I don't know, or like we'll do some Jonathan Haidt stuff. But right now, I don't really want to get deep into like denouncing extremists and stuff like that. I think that's.
Do you have anything on epistemology?
Yeah, so epistemology got a bit further down, but I guess we can. I think we should probably touch on it now before we move on, because it's basically the same point of the doubt. So it's this whole idea that you should put the focus of your conversation on the epistemology of the other person.
What is epistemology? Just for people that don't know.
So my understanding of epistemology is basically so epistemology, isn't it the study of knowledge and the study of how somebody knows something? Yeah. So basically, if you're focusing on the epistemology of somebody else, you're basically studying, or you're trying to focus on their reasoning process. So what logic flow are they following? So like this means this means this means this. So when they give you a conclusion or give you a belief, the whole point of focusing on epistemology is being like, okay, you believe that, so how have you come to believe that? And then they explain to you that, oh wow, I believe this because this bit of data said this, or this person said this to me. And then you probe them further and you say, oh, that person said that to you, they must be really reliable, or something like that. Yeah. And they're like, oh yeah, but he's followed by him. And they start giving you the reasoning behind why they're so sure of their belief. And the whole point is, as you get them to go further down their chain, they're probably going to realize they might have chinks in the armor.
Exactly.
It's not foolproof or bulletproof, as you will. And then this is where it's actually really interesting. It's now better not to go on the attack. So most people will probably think, use these tools, right? You could use these tools technically to get somebody's reasoning and then destroy their reasoning and feel all powerful because you'd be like, haha, you're reasoning shit. Or you could be the type of person who basically sort of gives them a bit of face saving. So they talk about this later called golden bridges. So let's say now you've probed their reasoning and they've started, you can see it in them. They started to realize, oh shit, I don't really know what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
And you could easily just pile in, or you could sort of offer them, like you could either change subject maybe, because you probably, if they're already giving you those sort of faces, you know you've already done your job. They're now going, actually, hang on a second, I don't really know this.
But yeah,
Or
exactly.
you could probe further and just be like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. Have you ever? And then this is where you talk about what you were saying, where you give them a new mental model. You could just be like, oh, but have you thought about it this way, or have you thought about this alternative way of viewing it?
Yeah.
And you're more likely to do that.
Yeah, you shouldn't blame someone for not knowing something, especially when they come to the realization that they don't know it. There's no point in like hammering it home, like because we were the same up until that point. It's like before we had this kind of opinion on something, we had a different one, and it's very easy, like you were just saying, a golden bridge. It's very easy to be like, oh, like I'm the same. Like before I thought this, I used to believe in this ridiculous thing. So you're kind of like creating.
I wouldn't label it as ridiculous.
No, not as in their point, but as in like I used to think this completely ludicrous thing before, and then I found. Okay,
I got you.
So you're kind of like taking the piss out of yourself, making you seem more approachable, and lessening the importance of them not knowing something.
Yeah, but that's also rapport building as well, isn't it? It's like showing that you're like, and you're not. This is such an interesting thing. You're just basically showing them that there's no judgment coming from you, that you really understand them and you understand how they're feeling right now. And it's almost like mind reading. When somebody feels like their mind's being read, they actually feel comfortable because they're like, this person really gets me.
Exactly. I think another point I had actually was a lot of the time when we have these kind of impossible conversations, there's normally like a duality. There's like, an opposition, like two oppositions. And so, you could be right wing and you could be left wing, and so you think because you're talking about this subject of politics that you have to be on the opposite side. But he brings up a good point in terms of like acknowledging extremists. So if you look at this on like a spectrum, and let's say they're on like the far left and you're in like the middle, then by emphasizing that you have extremists on your side, on the right side, it makes you seem closer together. Okay, because you're like expanding the spectrum, which makes it seem like you're closer together. And when you're closer together, someone is more able to accept you and actually talk about certain things, because you could be like, yeah, I know there's people on the far right that are actually crazy,
especially if they're on the side that you're on, right? Yeah, and it's denouncing people who take your points too far, and it's showing that you are on the middle ground, which most people are.
Exactly. And you're also like, you emphasize the kind of things that you have in common. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and you're emphasizing what's too far as well, almost. You're emphasizing that take it too far, and that because basically most people in the middle would assume the people on the opposite side who are far right or far left are taking things too far, right? So, but you're almost mind reading again. You're telling them what they already believe, like, oh, these people take it too far. This is where.
But it's very easy to be like put into like an umbrella label, like, oh, you're the right, you're on the right. I mean, and it's like, well, yeah, but like there are people on my right that are extreme, but not everyone's like that.
I don't want to get into it, but there's no universal, what's it called, scale-free political sort of perspective. So, for example, I think somebody said something along the lines of like, as a family, you're socialist. At the state level,
it depends on the context.
It depends on the context. So, like, you can't just say one person's completely left-wing through and throughout. Or somebody's completely right-wing. So this is the sort of ludicrousy of like these fucking labels that like don't actually sum up somebody as a human being. They just sum up their like sort of that scale view. So like at the sort of at the what do you call it, like the countrywide level, they're left, but like in the individual level, they tend not to be.
Well, he does talk about the label effect, like instead of just labeling someone as something that has already so many connotations to it, be like on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think you are like?
We'll jump onto that later because that's some high level tactics. That shit is good. Right, I got my one last point before we can actually move on to. Actually, wait. Yeah, no, that was in a second actually. So yeah, one of the last things I got. I don't know if you got onto this one as well. So like the definition of words. We kind of talked about this earlier, I think. Yeah. So like a lot of disagreements can be about disagreement of words. So like. The point is, so he uses this as an example in the book. So someone might say, for instance, I hate the government, when they actually mean like they hate intrusive government, or it could be corruption, it could be bureaucracy, it could be concentrated political authority, it could be regulations. that don't sort of believe in their values, but they use the umbrella term, like you just said, this umbrella term to incorporate those concepts as government, right? And then government to you means, for example, in the UK, it could mean government. They provide to the NHS, they provide healthcare, they provide welfare. So you basically get this whole argument about the government because one person sees it as like a really positive force, and one person just hates the idea of corruption. Okay, but they're not actually arguing about the government. This guy's arguing about corruption, and this guy's arguing about the fact that government is actually like a necessary evil kind of thing,
Yeah.
And the whole point here is one of the best things you can do up front is when somebody says something like, I fucking hate this thing, or I hate the government, you just go, what do you mean by the government?
Get them to define it.
And then what they would tend to do then is they, like, literally, as you just said, they will refine it. This is what happens to most people. They will say something very broad, okay? And then if you can either go, what do you mean by that? Or the best one you can even do is just mirror them. So you repeat the same thing they just said. So I hate the government, right? And you just go, the government? Question mark. Like, the term. And then they realize you haven't understood them. Okay. So then they have to repeat it in a more specific way. And then what you'll find is the more you do that, the more they will get down to the actual crux of what's the problem. And it's it's amazing if you think about it, how vague in general we are, because we can't find the words because we're lazy, and we'll just say like a generic thing, and people they don't understand a word you're fucking saying, but they just nod on and go, yeah, all right.
Well, the words can mean so many different things depending on the context. Like we talked about this in terms of like, chemicals, like how you define chemicals in physics or biology or chemistry, or like all these different kind of contexts. And you get it in loads of nonfiction books. At the very beginning, they'll be like, I'm going to discuss this word in this kind of context. Whenever I say government, it means this, so it's more clear. You have clarity. That's what you're trying to do in these kind of conversations, create clarity so someone can actually follow your train of thought.
Mm-hmm. No, but it's really, by the way, this clarity, this whole idea of clarity, and like vagueness is really interesting, because I think we talked about this back on our communication, like Rome recap thing. Mm-hmm. This idea, I thought about this quite a lot recently. When you ask a vague question, you will get a vague response. And this isn't even what's the word? Like, how we talked about this idea of having like a regurgitated response, like the same response you say to everything. So when somebody says to how are you, you go, I'm good, you? That's like regurgitated. Yeah. Not even just that. I mean, like, if you say to somebody, how was your holiday? It's so vague. They have to open up their brain to such a wide variety of experiences to incorporate like a memory, right? Whereas if you went to them, how was the night you went to the restaurant on your holiday? It's way more specific. They can definitely go in and tap up those memories, and they will find something way more specific to tell you than if you say to them, how was your holiday, as a broad thing. And this is kind of what I mean by like this. We kind of walk around with these really vague conversations, and we never really dial down to the specifics. I found this to be true for myself. I get really annoyed when somebody asks me a really vague question, right? And I really struggle to find an answer because my brain is really struggling to find like a specific memory or something to grab hold of in your past to then tell somebody about. And then what happens is they give you the cheek of just saying, oh, well, you're boring, or like, you're like, oh, it sounds like you didn't do much. I'm like, well, okay, maybe fucking ask a different question then. So my point would be, somebody asks you, how was your day? Fucking way too broad. What happened today? Slightly better. Because then you go back through and think what actually happened today, which was notable. Or then you say something even better, like what was the best part of your day? That is, then you can think back and to there might not have even been a good part. Like maybe what stood out in your day? Anything which gives your brain more criteria to search in my head is a better question than just a vague, how have you been? Fucking bullshit. What did you do last week? Much better. What did you do this morning? Better.
Do you think it's because how are you is limiting because you only have a certain amount of emotions to talk about?
I don't think it's
whereas
well, actually, do you know what? Maybe it is. I would say how are you is more like,
but I'm thinking out loud. But
I'll tell you what, I have to say, my favourite people are the people when you go, how are you? And I remember this one guy I met, and I think it was my driving instructor when I was learning. Okay, like I was learning to drive. Right? He went, I'm fucking brilliant. How are you? Every time. And I remember it. I remember it because it was so weird. But at the same time, he achieved what he wanted to do, and he actually uplifted me every day. Because I'd be like, every time I see him, like, how are you? And he'd be like, I'm fucking great. I'd be like, sick. Like, that's cool. Because we're so like, but this is, we're off a tangent. I'm going to get back. But anyway, this is back to the point where you said the other day, it's like the novelty thing. Like, how can you break somebody's pattern? Their patterns, how are you? I'm good. How are you? It's like, how are you? I'm fucking brilliant. Like, although you probably look slightly like autistic or something like that, but you know what I mean. It's hard to portray. Like, I don't know. I think people almost do it because they don't want to stand out. I would say that's the reason why. They don't want to say, "I had a really great day," because basically, you almost feel like if they haven't had a good day, then you're boasting. So you have to be like, "Oh, it's all right." Everybody downplays their life. Everybody downplays their life because nobody wants, especially English people, because nobody wants to seem like they're boasting. So everybody's like, "How are you? How have you been doing?" "Oh, I've been doing okay, just working." "What about you?" "Yeah, just work." "What do you do for work? For fuck's sake!"
What's ridiculous is just even a tiny bit of specificity makes such a difference.
Yeah, true. And so I'm sitting here and I'm venting, but at the same time, I'm so English when I meet people, I'll do exactly the same thing. I'm just
I do it all the fucking time. Yeah.
So like it may sound like I'm like if people who know me are probably thinking, or if they listen to this, are probably thinking he never fucking does that anyway. No, you're right, I don't, but I want to.
I feel like Jack is quite specific.
Yeah, Jack's good. Jack's very good.
Jack's good with that kind of thing.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, no, for sure. There's a few people like, but they're the ones who like you sort of make a bigger impression on you to a degree. Yeah. So you feel like you've had a better conversation almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, rant over. I'm going on to the next bit. So he talked about like a few little bit of tips on language.
Mm-hmm.
So I quite like these ones. So he says use collaborative language. So instead of your say we.
Yes.
So
yeah.
We can
make it in court.
Yeah.
Make you feel
collaborative language, and then he says use also neutral. So instead of saying, "Oh, so you believe," or "your belief is this," to "that belief" and "one's belief." I think "one's belief" is a bit weird. I don't really think it really works. Oh, "one's belief is this." No, "that belief" I think is quite good though. So like you could be like, "Oh, that belief's like slightly weird." Instead of saying "your belief," because it's like then personalized. So those are the two that stood out to me. And there's one more, which was instead of saying "I disagree," which is immediately like you're wrong. You know what I mean? I disagree with you. In fact, I did it to you a second ago, and you said something like, "Oh, is it this?" Like, no.
I felt really, really hurt. I wanted to shut the whole conversation down.
Did you? But as I should have said this, right? I'm skeptical. So he says that is because then it signals that you might be open to discuss it.
Yeah.
Which is what I probably should have said, but I'm a bit harsh on you, mate. I'm sorry. I apologize.
You are. I'll forgive you, mate. It's fine.
No worries, mate. Thank you.
I just won't ever, I don't feel comfortable to ever say my opinion now.
Shut you down on the book while we're discussing the book, which is
it's not a comfortable environment. I'm talking.
Oh dear. Oh fuck's sake! Right. Okay. Now, so that was all the stuff I had in language. It's about you, but then long pause. Okay, that was a good, interesting one as well. The idea that if they pause, don't fill in the silence because that usually means they're reflecting. So, if anything, he was arguing that a pause is a sign of conversational success, like you're making them think, which is the whole point of this.
Yeah, you don't always have to be talking.
Yeah, no, not at all. And then, okay, after that, I'm just kind of just going through my notes in like a systematic manner because that's the way I sort of got them. So this is the one that I quite liked, and I know you like this one a lot as well. So it was the scales to test knowledge. Yeah. So I quite like this one because I don't even think 1 to 10 works. So it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that this is the case? Because it lets them put it in perspective. So it lets them think like, how sure am I this is true? Like it's basically a way of saying, would you bet on this belief? Like if you had 50 quid, would you bet on it? But I really like it because it gives you also leeway, doesn't it? Because I think it was a way of like tracking your success. So you could be like, at the beginning of the conversation, like, oh, wow, scale of 1 to 10, how much do you believe that coronavirus is like really bad? Somebody gives you an 8, and then you have this whole conversation, you're probing epistemology at the end, just like, and then at the end you'd be like, oh, just so I know, like, what's how confident are you now? Although to me, I wouldn't want to do that because I feel like it's almost like
I remember us talking about this when we read it. Yeah. It's a bit of a strange thing to like bring up. Like I personally, in my own language would never really say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of a twat are you? You know,
I would say something along the lines of me. Actually, it depends how combative you're feeling. I would say something along the lines of, "Would you put money on that?"
yeah.
Like, would you be willing to bet me 50 quid that that's true? That is quite combative, but at the same time, I feel like that's more colloquial than a 1 to 10. It's like, oh, I'll bet you 10 quid.
Well, I think all these points that we talk about, and I remember us talking about this. I remember us talking about this after we read the book. It was like all of these points are step by step kind of guides, but you kind of just got to merge it with your authenticity.
Yeah,
Your kind of, we all speak in different ways. If I
sure.
suddenly went up to someone and said, on a scale of 1 to 10, they'd be like, well, it feels very contrite. It feels very controlled, you know? It's got to be you. You've got to adapt your own way of doing these things. It doesn't have to be like word for word and
I
exactly
think
how
this
to
why this
say
book
it.
was quite good in the sense that, like, the principle here is try and use a way of gauging their belief strength. Like, a scale to 1 to 10 could be it. Or, like, I think even here he says, like, another example would be, like, how important is this compared to this? So let's say they have really strong opinions on climate change and then racism. How important is racism compared to climate change? Just so you can
Yeah,
gauge where they're at. Like, this
yeah,
idea of, like, you just basically just trying to gauge their strength of belief kind of thing. And, like,
mm.
it's just a principle, right? It's not like this is a tactic, but there's many ways you can say the same thing. And it's the same here. He talks about, like, let's just say you got into an argument where it's like it's a yes it is or a no it's not argument. So, like, the United States is racist, and then they go no it's not. Then it's like then it's the perfect time to put it on a scale, because when
Yeah,
something is binary, that's when it's good to get into scale thinking. I think that's one of his points. Like, if
yeah,
you're
that's
having
true.
this
Yeah,
binary yes or no argument, it's better to then try and get the scale out and be like, on a scale of what? Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how racist is the United States compared to, I don't know, another country? That type of thing, where you're putting it into perspective, because a lot of this stuff is not based on like binary perspective of like a 1-2 comparison rather than a comparison on a broad range. If
yeah,
that makes sense. And that's where a lot
yeah.
of these
That makes a lot of
come
sense actually.
from, because it's like dichotomous thinking. It's like this or that. It's not like a long range of like potential like sort of variation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
0-1 v 0 to 1,000. It's just is that type of thing. And I've got a few more here, mate. And I've almost done with all my notes. I don't know whereabouts what you have. If there's anything I've missed.
Well, I've talked a lot about. Well, we've kind of touched on a lot of these kinds of areas. We've
Yeah,
already talked about golden bridges and
golden bridges,
and
which is basically
how
in
to
my head.
change your
The way I
mind.
conceptualize golden bridges is the same phrase of saving face from How to Win Friends. It's just a way to make them not feel like um, they're stupid. It's just
Shit
a way.
about
Yeah, it's not a way they're fucking dumb.
yeah, fucking idiot.
So basically, it's a way of making them feel like it's okay to make mistakes, kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, so my last couple of ones here. So there's a whole bit on like dealing with anger, and some of this stuff is quite like dealing with ideologues. I don't really want to get into that, like dealing with people who literally will not agree to whatever you say. But anyway, so one of them's about outsourcing beliefs. So this one, back to what I was trying to say earlier. So they might say you probe the epistemology. They're like, right, I heard this from this person. I heard this from this. Then you start sort of saying, like, oh, this person, I know about them. Like, oh, like, what makes you trust them more than the BBC?
Mm.
You know, what makes like get a
Yeah,
comparison?
yeah.
What makes you trust them more than this source? Okay, I guess this almost feels like an interview at this point, but I personally I would find it hard to bring this sort of stuff up. But it's just interesting anyway, and it's just worth trying to figure out how they see these people they're putting on pedestals, and whether or not it's just
Yeah.
like he's a scientist, so I should listen to him.
Well, that's the fact that like well, he talks about it in this chapter where seek disconfirmation.
Mhm.
It's like, how could that be wrong? Like, okay, you're saying that you believe in this 100% of the time, but what if I provide you a context in which it is wrong? Would it still be wrong?
Sure.
It's like, I think he gives like an example. Maybe it was like guns or something.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, but in this scenario, would it still be wrong? And you kind of basically paint it in a way that it's impossible for it to be right. And so they're like, okay, well, now there is areas in my belief where it can be wrong.
Okay, is that part of the reframing? I think it might be. Like, you reframe the situation to anyone. But I get what you mean. I get. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We didn't touch on that earlier, but that's a very potent sort of like way of getting people to doubt themselves if you basically provide a context where it's almost impossible to believe what they believe.
Like, it's normally for, like, strong extremists, because most people would be able to see, like, if you posed a situation, that'd be like, oh yeah, of course that'd be wrong. But like for people that are, only think that there's one answer, when you provide this tiny bit of doubt because you paint a scenario where it has to be wrong, that's when they're like, oh shit.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yes, no, mate, you're right. Sorry, yeah, I like that one. This he even says it in the. I've literally just found the note where what you're just talking about. So it says the single most effective technique to instill doubt and help people change their minds is to ask, under what conditions could your belief be wrong? And that's what you're just saying. This confirmation thing, you make them literally search for when they would. And basically, I think this is the point you were trying to make then as well, right? And this, I'm just trying to. If they then say it can't be wrong, if they can't disconfirm it, then they're kind of like an ideologue, because they are literally lying to you that they can't find a way to. If they can't disconfirm it, then it's a religion. It's because anything can technically be disconfirmed, and if it can't be falsified, it's not science.
Yeah, a perfect example is like racism. You probably get it in the South in America, and you'd be like, oh, do you always think black people are terrible? And they'd be like, yeah. And then you'd be like, okay, but what if someone was to, save your life?
Mm-hmm.
And, you've got a whole family and they save your life and your whole family from like a burning building. Would that still be bad? And, it's impossible to argue that.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, you basically, I almost feel like that is too, in my head, that will almost be too direct in a way as well. Because it's kind of like repackaging their words in a way that they would never agree with. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I can see why it'd be effective. Like we said before, this is like, it's just the principles, This isn't like, it's not going to work for everybody. Like some people won't feel comfortable doing half of this. I mean, to be honest, half the battle is actually just asking good questions.
Yeah.
That's it. And getting them to realise that they don't really know what they think they know.
Yeah.
The last thing, so I got Rappaport's rules for giving an opposing point of view. Did you get to that bit? Or do you have any
yeah, but can you go over what Rapport is again?
So Rapport, I can't actually remember who it is, why. It's basically it's somebody's rules for dealing with an opposing point of view. So you have to attempt to re-express the other person's position so well that they basically go, oh wow, like thanks for putting it that way, that's very clear. And then you've got a list, after that, you list all your points of agreement. And then you mention what you've learnt. So basically let's just say we're having an argument, I'd literally listen to everything you said to me. I would then repeat it back to you being like, so you believe this, this and this and this, and be like, oh wow, I completely get that. I completely agree with that. And then you'd be like, I can't believe you said that because I learnt a lot from that. Like I didn't know that. So you're basically bolstering. And then, only then, he says, are you allowed to sort of offer a rebuttal?
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite interesting. There was in the Seems Taleb's, the Skin in the Game I just recently reread, he talks about some of the, like Karl Popper, the guy who came up with like the falsification principle of science. He basically, whenever he was in a debate, his routine was always to repeat the opposition's points first. And just describe exactly what they just said and then go on to rebuttal points, because that way it showed that he's understood them and listened to every point, and then he systematically like dismantles the argument, which I thought was quite an interesting way of doing it. It's like before you attack somebody, you need to make sure you understand exactly. I think that's, if anything, this could be for the book. So not even just instilling doubt, but the ability to put back to them their exact argument with all their epistemology before you go, hang on a second. And also, while you're at it, while you re-say their points, you then say to them what you agree with. You say like, oh, that's a really good point there. I didn't know that. That's great. And then you can, go in on them.
Yeah.
I think if I was gonna, 2 points to summarize, I think it's the key points of this book is you instill doubt through using epistemology, making sure you understand their points. And the other point, the other principle, this would be trying to find understanding and, trying to be able to recite back to the other person their argument before you seek to disprove it,
Yeah.
So like understand it to the point where you can say it as well as they can, and then instill doubt by asking questions.
And while doing all of this, while creating like a comfortable kind of environment.
While cycling on a unicycle, juggling 5 other things, just try that.
And then you'll be there. Then you'll be able to have a conversation.
And you'll be able to have an impossible conversation.
You'll be able to say hello to someone, and that will be.
And then you might be able to get your first date, and there you go. Right, and that's a wrap.
Well, hopefully that piqued your curiosity, guys. After all, that's why we're here. If you'd like to know more about this book, head on over to our website, wisewords.blog. And if you have a particular book in mind you think we should review, send us a DM to our Instagram at wisewordsblog. Until next time, guys, have a good one.